Hello.
Hi!
So I am in I call this my Shaun the Sheep jumper. I love wearing this jumper. It's so cozy. And I have my tea in my Nightmare Before Christmas mug. It is the 20th of December today, Sunday the 20th. It's currently like 2:45 a.m. in the morning because I am kind of an insomniac, which is why I am pre-filming some videos so that I can put them up when I go back to my parents later on today during daylight hours. I can edit this while I'm back home over Christmas. So over the next like 10 days or so, I'll get videos up, but they'll all be filmed here because editing takes so long because my computer's so slow. The videos you see in the next like week or so will be pre-filmed, but I'm doing them all today. I wanted to come in and do my Sunday reads because I haven't done a catch-up on my current reading for a while. At the moment, I am actually reading Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier, which I'm liking so far. I'm only one chapter in, but loving it. War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. I've read The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, and I really like that book. At the moment, I'm actually quite enjoying this. And also reading some Sylvia Plath because I want to do a favourite authors video, so I wanted to reread Ariel before I do that. That's what I'm currently reading, but the books I have read recently are... I actually DNF'd Apeirogon, which is kind of embarrassing because I was actually adoring it, but I started reading this at the start of November, and that's when work started up again, uni started. I had a lot on and was not in the mental headspace to read this. This book is beautifully written. Like, the prose is fantastic. The structure is really fascinating. It's like really short chapters, like that, little vignettes, and then it goes to like chapter 500 at page 200, and then it reverts to going backwards, which is really interesting. But I only got to the bit where it gets up to chapter 500 and then it starts reverting back, because even though they were short chapters, so it is actually really easy to dip in and out of, the content is really hard going. So it's about these two guys who, one's Israeli and one's Palestinian, and both their kids get killed, and it's kind of like PTSD style, where it reverts back in time and dissociates to other things, and it's collagey, where it will do non-fiction pieces about what happened, and then it will do their own perspectives on what happened in their like own words, and then it will zoom off and talk about some like YouTube video of this guy walking on a high wire between Israel and Palestine. It is like really well written, really well thought out from what I've read, but it's just so hard going because these men's real lives. So when I keep reading like page after page about these 10-year-old girls getting blown up on the street, I was like, I am not in the mental headspace to be reading this properly. I was crawling through it, and then on like the 8th of December, I was still reading it, and I'd only got halfway, and
we've still got a way to go.
I was like, I'm not giving this the attention it deserves, so I'm going to reread it at another point.
Perhaps some other time.
But I was really enjoying it, so I would highly recommend it. But it is like really hard subject matter because it isn't just about Israel and Palestine. Like, it's about just history in general and the bad parts of history in general. Like, there'll be bits about Israel and Palestine, there'll be bits about the Holocaust, and I was like, I'm not in the mental headspace for all this really hard subject matter at the moment. So I'm sorry, Colin McCann, but I'll come back to you.
Now finish it!
Have any of you read any other Colin McCann? Because I'd never heard of him before this novel. Right? After I gave up on that, for the time being, I picked up Garth Greenwell, What Belongs to You, which I've wanted to read for about a year, and I adored this book. Adored it. This was as good as contemporary gay fiction gets. It's set in Bulgaria, I think, and this American guy who basically is like, I guess, an alias of Garth Greenwell in it. He's like a writer unnamed teaching in schools, and then he talks about his like love interest called Mitko. It's just so beautiful, so highly recommend it. It's only 180 pages, but even though this was taking me like a month to only get through half of it, I devoured this in like 3 days. Amazing. Read it.
It was that way with me, Lisa. And for you it will be just as wonderful, I promise.
And then the next recent favourite would be the Forward Book of Poetry 2021. This is recent poems published in the last year, and the Forward Prize is kind of like the Booker Prize, but for British poetry. Every year or so I like to read these because it always feels like a pleasure to keep up with what contemporary poetry is like, because every year it seems like it all reads the same, but it doesn't. When you read it every year, you're like, every year the poetry is so different. I really enjoyed this because I wasn't getting on with Apeirogon as well as I'd liked, just because it was so hard going. It was nice to dip out of that into some poetry. Some of the poets in here I have heard of. Some of them are more established, but I think a lot of them are poets you hadn't heard of before. Or at least I hadn't heard of them. It was really interesting because this year the judges were judging it over COVID, like over lockdown. So it's really interesting the kind of poems they chose. A lot of the time in contemporary poetry, they try to avoid narrative as much as possible, and they try to use language in like weird, disconnected ways so that nothing makes sense. Like, it reads as if the poet knows what they're doing, but it actually just doesn't make logical sense.
You don't get it, do you?
I don't understand.
But a lot of the poems in this were of a more narrative vein, so I found that really interesting. Sometimes there was a reversion to form. Like, a lot of the time, contemporary poetry is just lyrics, and they're just like loose forms, and the poet does whatever they want with the space. But in this, there were sestinas, there were some sonnets. I guess they wanted to choose stuff that, because it's a narrative, it's quite easy to follow. So during lockdown, if their minds were going crazy, it was easy enough to understand. And while they were locked in, it was kind of, they were contained, like the poems were contained in the forms, like sonnets and sestinas. So I liked that. There were a lot of non-Anglo voices, so there were lots of like Chinese voices and just non-traditional English voices. So I found that interesting as well. I want to read you one of the poems, which is called Sonnet with Particles of Gold. I read this in between a lesson when I was teaching in school, and I was like, this is beautiful. This one is by someone called Nina Mingya Powells, and I think she is part Chinese, because the poem on this page was like a kind of one of those fill in your own poems one. So there's like different words there, and then you can fill it in there. So that was okay, but I found that kind of gimmicky. So that poem, I don't really like that style that much. But then on the next page, by the same poet, is the more traditional poem. So there's a sonnet on this one. This one I really liked, so I'm going to read you this one. Sonnet with Particles of Gold. This has like Chinese letter writing in it, and I don't know any Chinese, so I'm just going to skip over those, sorry. Sonnet with Particles of Gold. Today, scientists discovered the origins of gold. The sound of egg noodles crisping up in the wok. The garden carpeted in kowai petals. The way my phone corrects Rumati, summer, to rainstorm. The day after my grandmother died was white gold in colour. A star explodes and wings are found among the debris, along with pieces of a character I never memorised. Our only name for her, a woman beneath a wave. Drift. She mouthed softly in English. What is drift? My mother translates into her language, not one of mine. I try to make myself remember by writing some Chinese word over and over on squares of paper covering the walls, so I am surrounded by the women and the water radicals they hold close. The tips of waves touch me in my sleep. So yeah, I love that poem, even though obviously I don't know the Chinese words and I'm too lazy to look them up, which is really, really bad, especially when I'm reading this out to people. But I thought even though I don't know the words, it still seems to make sense to me. I love that she was trying to bridge over the gap in language, and still, like, even if you don't understand a word, it can still have a meaning for you. If you're unsure about getting into contemporary poetry, this would probably be a really, really good place to start, actually. They do look forward to it as well, so, you know, that gives you bearings, so to speak. So, yeah, would recommend that. That is my Sunday reads for this week. What are you reading at the moment? And have you been struggling with any books lately? Do you have any plans to read any specific books over Christmas? I want to read It by Stephen King. I want to read Actress by Anne Enright. Winter by Ali Smith, because season. Thank you very much for watching. And I hope you have a good Christmas. Alright, bye.
There's a love between us two, but some